Hey kids, welcome back to our series, Teach Us to Pray. We're continuing to learn from a very important prayer from the Bible. It's called the Lord's Prayer. It's a prayer that Jesus prayed in order to teach his disciples how to pray. We're going to learn from the second verse of the prayer today. But first, I have a question for you. Have you ever had your parents tell you to do something that you found hard to obey? Maybe they told you to clean your room, but you really didn't want to. Maybe it was something else. We have all had times when we want to do one thing, but someone in authority tells us to do something else. It's hard to obey sometimes. Before we get into our lesson, I want you to check out this video.
I'm Peyton, and I'm going to be continuing the series called Teach Us to Pray. Have you ever thought about what you want to be whenever you grow up? Some of you have already planned it all out. Maybe you want to be a firefighter.
Oh, you think you bad now, huh? Come on, you ain't nothing but a red-headed twig. Come on, I'm gonna treat you like a birthday candle and blow you out.
Not that kind of firefighter. I'm talking about a real firefighter. One that works hard at saving lives. Or maybe you want to be a professional dancer. Not quite what I had in mind. I'm talking about this kind of professional dancer. Or maybe you've always dreamed of being a scientist.
Welcome to my laboratory. That's a laboratory for you simple people. That's where scientists work. We're about to do a little experiment. I'm gonna take this red chemical and I'm gonna mix it with the blue chemical. You're gonna be amazed at what's about to happen. Here we go.
Wow, that's dangerous. I was thinking more of a scientist like this. Or maybe you've dreamed of being a teacher, a pastor, or a missionary. We all have plans for our lives. But the most important plan of all is God's plan. You see, if we want to succeed, it's not about our plan or our will for our life. It's about God's plan and God's will for our life. And that is the next part of the Lord's Prayer that we're going to be talking about. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. This means we have to do our very best to fulfill God's will and his plan for our lives. It's a choice we have to make, but it's an easy choice. Why? Because we know that God's will is better for us. It's a no-brainer. For example, if I were to give you the choice of cake or broccoli, which one would you choose?
Boy, oh boy, I sure love me some cake. I like the sprinkles, I like the icing, I even like the smell of it. You have got to be kidding me.
Or would you choose a hug from your mom or a slap in the face?
I'm trying to think here, which one of them would I choose? Hey, how you doing, buddy? Ow, mommy! Mommy! That man slapped me.
Of course you would choose a hug from your mom. It's a no-brainer. In our lives, we should decide, should we choose our will or God's will? It's a no-brainer. We should choose God's will. God's plan is always better. Sometimes our plans match with his. Other times, ours don't. But one thing's for sure, God's plan is always best. Well, it's time for you to get into your lesson today as you learn about the Lord's Prayer and how to seek God's will. This is Peyton reminding you, you can pray every single day. See ya!
Obedience can be tough. Sometimes obeying God's will can be one of the hardest things to do, but it's always worth it to honor and obey him. His plans are way better than our plans. You're going to learn all about that today, about honoring and obeying God's will in your lesson. But right now, we need to check in with our friend, Big Ray, and he's going to teach you what you got to know.
What you got to know? What you got to know? What you gotta know? What you gotta know?
Hey there, kids. I'm Big Ray, and I'm here to tell you what you gotta know. Today, we are learning the importance of following God's plan. So anytime today you hear somebody ask you what you gotta know, you tell them, I'm gonna do my Father's will. God's got a plan for your life and my life. They are big plans. Big plans. So when you pray, make sure you pray for God's will to be done in your life. You gotta follow His plans so that you become exactly who He wants you to be. So anytime today you hear somebody ask you what you gotta know, you tell them, I'm gonna do my Father's will. And that right there is what you gotta know. This is Big Ray, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
What you gotta know?
Well, God bless and good morning, boys and girls.
Hey everybody, it's Patty Pramore. So what's up, Patty?
Pardon me, dearie, but did you just say, what's up?
Yeah?
Huh. We will not use that kind of slang in church. You do not ask a seasoned lady, what's up? I don't care if she's up on a 17-foot ladder. You say, how are you?
Okay. How are you, Patty?
Oh, it's Miss Pramore.
How are you, Miss Pramore?
Oh, I'm just doing fine, my little sugar dumpling. How are you?
Well, I'm okay, but now my head's kind of hurting after yelling at me.
Oh, bless your heart. I'll pray for your little coconut head.
Okay, speaking of prayer, we're still on our series, Teach Us to Pray. Today, we're on the second verse of the Lord's Prayer.
Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Wow, you said that perfectly.
I sure did. I love this part. It's so nice hearing God tell me I can have everything I want.
What?
Well, it says, Ura will be done. My middle name is Ura. So God wrote that verse especially for me. He's saying, Ura, honey child, I love you so much. You're such a wonderful Sunday school teacher. So you can go ahead and do whatever your heart desires.
Miss Pramore, I don't think that's what the verse means.
What do you mean?
When Jesus was praying that prayer, he was talking to God. When he said, your will be done, he was meaning God's will, not your will be done. He was saying to God that no matter what happens, he wants to follow God's plan and nobody else's.
Oh, well, that's what I was about to say. You really need to learn some manners. I wasn't born yesterday. I'm almost 97 years old.
What? You're how old?
Never ask a woman her age. I'm sorry, but I have to go, my little angels. I've got a bingo game to attend and I'm feeling lucky. God bless and good morning. Bye-bye.
Well, see you later, Miss Pramore. Good. Well, boys and girls, it's time to get back to your lesson.
Thank you, Miss Rochelle. Today's Bible story is found in 1 Samuel 3. It's all about a young boy named Samuel. Samuel was a boy who lived and worked in the temple for the priest Eli. Can you imagine actually living in a church? How cool would that be? Well, it wouldn't be the same for Samuel as it might be for you today. There were no video games to play, no playground to play in. And Samuel just lived in the temple and did a lot of work for the priest Eli. One night, after a long day of working in the temple, Samuel was sleeping. Suddenly, he was awakened by the sound of someone calling his name. Samuel, Samuel. He assumed it was the priest Eli calling to him. So Samuel got up and went to Eli's room to ask what he wanted. Eli said, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Samuel wasn't sure what had happened, so he went back to sleep. A little while later, Samuel was awakened by the same thing. A voice called to him, Samuel, Samuel. He got up and went back to Eli. Once again, Eli said, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. So Samuel went back to sleep. I'm sure he was really confused by now. Well, guess what? It happened a third time. Samuel, Samuel. So once again, Samuel went to Eli. This time, Eli had a thought. He knew it wasn't him that was calling Samuel. He thought maybe it was God. So he told Samuel, "It's God calling you. If he speaks again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went back to sleep, and sure enough, it happened again. Samuel. This time Samuel sat up in bed and said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." God began to tell Samuel some very important things that were about to happen. Isn't that amazing? Samuel had to not only listen to God's voice, but he had to obey. It turns out that God told him to do something very difficult. Samuel did not really want to do it, but he knew he had to obey God. He knew that God's will had to be done, so Samuel obeyed. Today in our lesson, we're going to learn all about how we must listen and obey God's voice. We must always seek to follow God's will and not our own. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. The second part of the Lord's Prayer says, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." God has a special plan, His will, for all of us, and we need to pray that God's will be done in our lives. The question is, how? How do we make sure we're following God's will? The first thing we have to do is to decide that our will, what we want, doesn't matter. Only God's will. Now, there's nothing wrong with having dreams and plans, but we can't be so committed to our own dreams and plans that we're not willing to do God's will and plan. Jesus understood this. Do you remember when Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane? We find the story in Mark 14. It's only a short time before Jesus is to be arrested and put to death. He knew exactly what was going to happen. Remember, He's omniscient, all-knowing. Did Jesus want to suffer and die a horrible, painful death? No. He asked God, "If it's possible, please let this cup pass from me." In other words, Jesus was saying, if there's any way possible, find another way to bring forgiveness to the world. Remember, Jesus was fully God and fully human. He felt the same things that we as humans feel. Knowing what He was about to go through on the cross must have been agonizing. But He said to God the Father, "Even so, I want your will, not mine." Jesus knew that He had to submit His own will and what He wanted in order to embrace God's will to save the world. If we hold on to our plan for our lives, then we will never fully embrace God's plan for our lives. So we must surrender our plan or our will so we can fully embrace God's plan for our lives. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is so worth it. God's plan for our lives is so much better than our plan. The next thing we have to do if we want to do God's will is we must spend time with God and listen to His voice. You might be thinking, does God speak to kids? He sure does. Remember our Bible story? God spoke to Samuel when he was just a child. God speaks to boys and girls. We need to spend time in His Word, the Bible, and He speaks to us through His Word. We have to spend time in prayer and listen to His voice. He may not speak out loud. Many times He speaks in a still, small voice that we hear in our hearts and minds. So if we want to do God's will, I must get rid of my own will. Listen to God's voice. And then, once you hear God's voice telling you what you need to do in a certain situation, you must obey Him. Samuel understood this. God told Samuel about some very bad things that were going to happen to Eli and his sons. Samuel's job was to deliver the message, but he didn't want to because he thought Eli would be upset with him. Even though it was hard, Samuel obeyed and told Eli the message that God had given him. In the same way, Jesus obeyed God and was willing to die on the cross. You must be willing to obey God and do whatever He asks you to do as well. It may not always be easy to do God's will, but you can always know that His will turn out to be what's best for you, always. Samuel went on to become a prophet of Israel. Jesus died and then rose again from the grave. And now we can go to heaven and spend eternity with God by believing that Jesus died for our sins. When we obey God's will, great things happen. We must listen and obey. Well, kids, that's all for now. May God bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine His face upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord look upon you and give you peace. Amen. Listen to this beautiful song about surrender, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now, kids.
Giving you my heart and all that is within. I lay it all down for the sake of you, my King. I'm giving you my dreams. I'm laying down my rights. I'm giving up my pride for the promise of a new and I surrender all to you, all to you, and I surrender all to you, all to you. Giving you my heart and all that is within. I lay it all down for the sake of you, my King. I'm giving you my dreams. I'm laying down my rights. I'm giving up my pride for the promise of new. And